Aloha everyone, my name is Caroline Wilhelm and I am the founder of the brand Moms Have This to Say, to run for moms, about moms, by a mom, me. And today I have a special guest who happens to be one of my closest friends, and her name is Leana. I'll have her introduce herself and what she does.
Aloha, thank you Carol for having me. It's such a pleasure being here. Yes, my name is Leana Taylor. I am a Maui native living here with my family. Took about a 20-year gap and moved to Southern California. We recently moved back about a year and a half ago, and it's just a pleasure to be back raising our 6-year-old daughter, Mealani, here where I grew up. I am a working mom. I work at Maui Health Foundation. I am the director of philanthropy, so I work with an amazing team with fundraising and raising funds for healthcare here on Maui and to better our community with healthcare on Maui.
Awesome. She's phenomenal. She's the best.
Thank you.
Not only do I love that she's such a go-getter and such a cool mom, but she also loves Lord, and she's just a fun person. And I remember saying one time when I first met her, I said, we're gonna be best friends.
Yep.
And that's exactly what happened. We just started hanging out, and our families love each other, our husbands like each other, our kids like each other, so that's awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, so I told her, I said, hey, you know, you're a working mom and you have a lot going on. I want to just pick your brain about motherhood and what you know, how has it changed you, you know, and anything you would like to advise somebody, what your experience has been. And I was like, you have to come and talk to my people. And she was like, yeah, sure, it's no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And you will see her quite often because I think she has a lot of great nuggets and just, she's a great person. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so motherhood is great, right? But everyone has a journey to motherhood, like how you got here. Like, did you even, like, did you want to be a mom, or you just happened to be a mom, or is it something you longed for a long time and then it finally happened? I would like to know my friend's journey to motherhood. So, Leana, what is your journey to motherhood?
So I always wanted to be a mother my whole life. I loved kids, and I knew I wanted to be a mom, and that it would have like completed my life and my identity to be a mother. Initially, I went to college right out of high school. I knew I wanted to go into sports medicine. I played volleyball and I tore my ACL, and I was in the athletic training room. So I decided to go into sports medicine. If I couldn't be an athlete, I wanted to help athletes. And I pursued that at the collegiate level, professional level, high school level, all different realms. At the age of 25, I was working at USC, which was one of the top universities in athletics, and just wasn't making much money. It was like $30,000 a year and working 80 hours a week, traveling all the time, and I thought to myself, there's no way I could do this and have a family. I actually did my thesis when I got my master's degree on balancing work and family for mothers in athletic training, and all the women I spoke to started crying because they were sacrificing time away from their kids for their jobs. So I decided to get out of athletic training for that reason, to put myself in a position to be available to have a family. And little did I know it would be about 15 years later that I'd actually become a mom. It took me a little while to find the right person, and my husband, Brian, I was about 31, and then we waited a while to get married. He had been married previously, had kids, and was working through his journey of becoming a husband again. Mm-hmm. And so we did not get married till I was about 39. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, I'm going to get pregnant 5 minutes later after we get married. And I did, but then I kept having miscarriages. So I had 3 miscarriages in the first year of our marriage, and that was really hard. I remember our doctor said, you know, after 3, we then suggest IVF or some type of help with fertility. So we said, okay, we'll do 1 round. We're not gonna like take out a second loan on our house and do 3 rounds like some couples do. We just thought we'll do 1 and done, you know, we'll see if it works. And so I went through that whole process of injections and, you know, all of the things that go along with it. And it's expensive too, you know, it probably costs like $26,000 just to start the process. And I remember when we went to the initial doctor's appointment, she's like, oh, you have like 12 follicles, which is good because I guess every follicle in your ovary produces an egg, essentially. So she's like, we have a lot to work with. You're a good candidate for IVF. So after we did the egg retrieval, they had, I guess, like harvested 10 eggs, and then what they do is they observe them to see if they mature and if then they can become embryos. So long story short, we had 5 embryos, and we did do genetic testing just because I had heard that my egg quality was part of the issue with fertility. And so we went to our follow-up appointment, and she said, did the genetic testing lab call you with your results? And I said, no, we haven't heard from them. And she's like, great news, you have 1 good embryo. And I'm like, what? I thought there were 5. And she's like, well, only 1 of them was genetically normal. And so I'm like sobbing in the appointment. And I said to her, well, what's the likelihood that it'll take? And she said 50-50. And Brian, my husband, was like, so you're saying we have a chance? And I'm like falling apart. And I just remember driving home, and well, she had said to me at the time, you know, you can do another round of the egg retrieval. And I'm like, we're still paying off the first $26,000 we owe you. Like, we cannot afford that, you know? And so I just remember driving home and calling my mom, and she was really encouraging. And, you know, obviously we were going to move forward with the 1. And so ironically, my day of implantation was my husband's birthday. So we'll never forget, August 24th was the day she was conceived. And then, you know, around Labor Day, we found out we were pregnant. And it was really a relief, but also I feel like after you've had 3 miscarriages, by the time you actually get pregnant, you're so delicate with yourself and your body, and you're just like afraid to do anything really. Like, I didn't want to work out really hard. I rested a lot. I took a lot of walks. I was trying to eat really well and just do everything I could to create the best environment for Meilani. And thankfully, it was a great pregnancy. I didn't have any issues. But then I had to get induced because I wasn't showing signs of going into labor before my due date. And because I was older, I was now 42, my doctor said it's kind of a high risk to keep you pregnant past your due date. So we're going to induce you, which was kind of nice because I was a little afraid of going into labor and no one being around or having to like Uber to the hospital by myself. And so what we did is we went the day before the delivery, and they give you a pill, and my husband and my stepdaughter Malu were with me. They spent the night, and it was kind of fun. It was like a slumber party in the hotel or in the hospital. And then the day of the delivery, they check you to see how dilated you are, and then I think once you're at a certain point, they break your water and you start, you know, going into contractions. And at that point, I think like every single grandparent was in the room. We had this huge, almost like suite, And that was interesting as well because my parents are divorced
Yeah.
and haven't been married for like 30, 40 years. And so they were all in it together. We were telling jokes and laughing, and I would take naps. And then by the time it was time for me to start pushing, the doctor cleared the room. And I remember my husband was to my left, my mom was on the right, and Malu was my stepdaughter behind me, so she couldn't see anything but was there. And that all went well. Like, she basically slid right out. But when she came out, she wasn't breathing. She had swallowed meconium, which is like the baby's first poop in utero. And I didn't know really what was going on. The doctor was like, oh, she swallowed a little bit of poopy. We're going to clean her up. And then they just quickly hurried her over to, the incubator. And at the time, there was a shift change of nurses. And so basically, like, a whole nursing staff came in. And Brian, my husband, had his back to me because he didn't want me to see her. And I guess she was kind of gray because she wasn't breathing. And you could hear her trying to gasp for her air, but she wasn't crying. So I knew something was wrong. My mom, you could tell, like, the look on her face, she was concerned, and she would walk back and forth and check on me and the baby. And I think Brian was afraid she wasn't going to make it, so he had his back to me to protect me from seeing her. And I just kept saying, is she pretty? Is everything okay? What does she look like? Because no one would let me see her. And so basically the doctor cleared away everybody in the room. And they took Leilani to the NICU, and Brian followed. And so my mom and Malu left, and I remember all the other family was outside the door waiting to see what was going on. And the doctor kind of yelled at them all to leave because they were in the way, and it really wasn't necessary for them to be there. So they all went home, and I was left by myself for 2 hours, and nobody came and gave me an update.
I think because they were not sure how to explain to you what's really happening.
Yeah.
Because they knew you were fragile and
Yeah.
They scare you.
Yeah, the nurses would come and ask me if I wanted food and dinner, and so I just.
So this whole time you haven't seen your baby?
No, I hadn't. I'd seen her kind of like just get swooped up and cleaned up, and then they took her off, and I knew Brian was with her, but I didn't know the status of her health and if she was going to make it. So my mind started kind of spiraling, like, is she going to live? What's going to happen? What would I do if she didn't make it? And finally Brian came in, and he was the first person that gave me an update, and he was crying, and I said, is she okay? And he said, no, she's not. She's so beautiful, and she can't breathe on her own, and there's nothing I can do to help her. And he just fell apart and was sobbing, and he said, where's your mom? And I said, well, the doctor sent everybody home. So he called his mom and said, send Sarah back. She needs to be here because I'm going to have to go with Leilani with the ambulance. I'm going to follow them to Rady's Children's Hospital. And so my mom and Malu came back, and I told Malu, start praying over your dad. Like, he's falling apart. And so we started praying over each other, over the hospital, over the staff, over Leilani. And then finally a nurse came in and said, you're going to see her, but I want you to be prepared. She's going to be on a lot of support because she needs a lot of help right now breathing. And I said, okay. And so I wasn't really shocked when I saw her, but she came in and she had so many fluids pumping through her. She kind of looked like a little sumo wrestler. And thankfully, she was a big baby. She was like 9 pounds, 4 ounces.
What?
So she was big, which was good for her to go to the NICU because sometimes you lose weight when you go.
Yeah.
And so all the nurses are like, this is the biggest baby we've had in the NICU.
9 pounds is a lot.
Yeah, usually it's like preemies or twins that go. And so basically Brian went with this like specialty ambulance to Rady's Children's, and thankfully we only were 20 minutes away. We were in Encinitas, and so had she been born in Mexico or Iowa or somewhere small town, and maybe even here. I don't know what type of capacity every region has, but thankfully we were in a place that they had one of the top 5 best children's hospitals 20 minutes away. And so she was transported that night. And I remember my mom spent the night with me in the hospital room, and I don't think either of us slept much. And I just said to her, like, I don't know what I'm gonna do if she doesn't make it. I really don't. Like, when your whole life you wanna be a mom, and it finally happens, and you've like dodged all the odds of getting here, and she, you know, made it, and now this happens. And I just didn't understand why, you know. And the crazy part is that was on a Thursday, and that Sunday was Mother's Day. And so I was basically discharged the next day on a Friday home, and they wanted to get me with her as soon as possible because it's better for both of you if you can be together. And so I remember walking into my house and walking by her bedroom with all her things, just thinking, what if she doesn't come home? What if we have all this stuff, we have this whole room set up for her and she doesn't come home? And it's just such a like surreal feeling coming home without your baby, because really only like NICU moms understand that. You know, everybody that typically has a baby brings their baby home with them. And so that was really hard. I remember going to Rady's with my mom, and she was like miles ahead of me, racing to the hospital. And I'm walking behind, and she said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I forgot you just had a baby yesterday.
I know, she's just like,
she's like waddle, and I hear I am waddling behind her. And so,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
I'm gonna slow down a little bit.
So we went to see her, and she was in her own suite. So she was on a vibrating plate on a cooling pad. They were trying to oscillate anything in her body or her lungs that were occluded. And the cooling pad was in case she had any brain damage from not getting enough oxygen during delivery. And so she had a lot of like feeding tubes and like ventilators and a lot of support. And I remember thinking, like, what is this gonna cost us, you know, because I don't even know how much all this support would cost. And I called the social worker, and she's like, well, you know, after like this point in time, your bill's about $100,000. And I'm like, okay. She goes, but you have insurance, right? And I said, yeah. She goes, okay, so you'll just pay your deductible and your insurance will pay the rest. So I was like, okay. Either way, like the goal is to get her out of here. And so a nurse came and spoke with me, and she said, you know, you're gonna have to we're gonna have to follow her at specialty clinics for different milestones to make sure that she's on track. And they're gonna have to do a brain MRI to make sure she didn't have any seizures or brain damage. And so now I'm picturing her in a wheelchair the rest of her life, you know, which sadly happens, and we would have gotten through it, but your mind just goes, you know, so many places.
Yeah.
So thankfully, I think there was another nurse who was actually a Christian and Irish. I remember she had an accent, and she said, you know, right now your job is to go home, rest, pump, and have your mom cook for you, hydrate, rest, because when she comes home, you're gonna have to have the energy to take care of her. And all I heard her say is, when she comes home. And that was like this flicker of hope for me that she was gonna come back. And then, like I said, Mother's Day was that Sunday, and we had had plans to go to my mother-in-law's, and I just remember being like a zombie and feeling like I was having an out-of-body experience. Like, am I even a mother? Like, I don't have my baby with me, and what if she doesn't make it? And would I still be a mother? And so my husband took me to see Pastor T. Lee, one of his Samoan pastor friends, and it was Mother's Day service, and after service we met with him and his wife, and he said to me, I believe she's going to be fully healed and restored.
Wow.
And the wife looked at me and said, "What do you believe?" And I said, "Well, I want to believe, but I don't know." And she goes, "No, you have to believe. You have to believe that she is going to be healed and restored."
Wow.
And so I then went home and I started chanting like mantras, like, if God is for me, who can be against me? He created all things. He created her. He created her for a purpose. She's coming home. She's coming home. And I was getting up every like 3 or 4 hours to pump, and my husband would send me sermons. So I was constantly, you know, feeding my spirit in worship. And in a way, I was like, God's allowing this for me to cling to him right now. And so I really had to choose faith in that moment. And then Brian believed, he's like, she's going to be fine. I believe it. Like, she's fine. She's going to be fine. Now, our mission field is the NICU. We are being called to pray over these babies, these parents, because you would see parents coming and going, and it was like their faces were vacant and they just had hopelessness on their face. Or some babies never had visitors, and so we would pray over them.
Aww, that is so sad.
I know. And some were born in Mexico, and so the parents couldn't come, but the babies could come. They would transport them, and so
That is
it was
crazy.
so
They would not
sad.
let the parent come with their child to the NICU
because
they're not
weren't
from this
citizens.
country. But you have my child.
Right.
This is crazy because I've known you for a while now, and I didn't know that your story for motherhood was that challenging at the beginning.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I didn't even know that Meilani was in the NICU.
Yeah. So she was there for 18 days total.
Wow.
And what was so amazing is once like I had a mind shift in my spirit to believe she would be fine, the doctor said, "We don't know what's happening, but she wants to get out of here. She's coming off all her support. The brain MRI shows nothing. Like, it never happened." Yeah, he's like, "I don't even want to have a formal meeting with you, an appointment. I'm just going to tell you right now, everything's fine, because I know parents worry and I don't want you to worry."
Wow.
And she never had, you know, any seizures. One, you know, milestone is to make sure they feed enough to get enough nutrients. So that was like our milestone to get her home. And I think it was like 3 ounces, you know, every 3 hours or something. So I was so thankful when we were able to leave after 18 days. I remember it was Memorial Day. And then it all began. And praise the Lord, she started walking at 9 months. We went to like her 6-month follow-up and her 12-month, and they're like, "We don't need to see her back. She's fine. Like, if she's walking and doing all these things, she's fine." And, you know, now knowing her, I mean, she's super athletic and
She's a go-getter.
bright and
She's
energetic.
She's so energetic. Like, now when I think about her and her beginning, you're like, what a trooper. She's such a fighter.
Yeah, and
I can see why she's such a fighter.
Yeah.
She is.
And that was actually something we would talk with like preschool teachers about sometimes, because she's very driven. And my husband would say, "Well, this is how her story began." So she came out fighting for her life.
Yeah.
And so if she has something in mind, she's going to find a way to get to it.
Yeah.
And I love that about her, because she is very driven.
She is a little driven girl. But wow, guys, wow. So here you are thinking, this is, you know, we're in the NICU. I don't know if she's gonna come home. And somebody tells you have to believe that she'll come home. And you have to, I believe it for you, but you have to believe it for yourself. And you believed it, and she came home, and she is now so much better than most kids. She's just amazing. That is so God.
It is, and it's really like part of my testimony and her testimony.
Yeah.
And I know God created her for a purpose, on purpose, and He'll use that in her life, and it won't be wasted.
It won't be wasted. And I think the thing about having a miscarriage and having kids a little bit later than most. I obviously resonate with that because that happened to me, but not, I just had one miscarriage. But it was after 4 years of trying. So I tried for quite a bit, and we were almost doing IVF when I got pregnant with my first, you know, the child that how do you say, had my miscarriage the first time. And that was after thinking, you know what, I had already forgotten that I was trying to get pregnant. You know how you kind of like, maybe it's not for me, maybe it's never gonna happen. Yeah, you're just like, yeah, maybe it's not for me. But I really, just like you, really, really wanted to be a mom. Really, really, really wanted to be a mom. And I think that's the beauty of having children a little bit later, is just you genuinely, really, really want it, you know?
Right.
And I'm not saying people who get them younger, they don't want it, but for us, it's just this need to have this child. I really want a child. And then God does what he does. And for me too, it was like, she wasn't, I had to do I was induced, obviously. Number two is that 2 weeks prior to being induced, she almost came. Her heart rate had gone really low, and they were gonna, you know, have, they're trying to get her out, and they're thinking, we're gonna give it a few hours, and if this doesn't work, we'll have a C-section. And I'm thinking, I don't want a C-section. So, and then when she came, she had an umbilical cord wrapped around her head.
Oh, yeah.
So, and that is scary, because she was, the reason why she was, her heart rate was going so low every time was because she was kind of strangling herself while trying to come out. No one knew that.
Right.
So I feel like God really wanted that child here, because, I mean, how did she make it? Because she came, her umbilical cord was strangled. She had strangled us, and then she was also, it was wrapped on her arm and her neck.
Wow.
So no matter what she was doing, she was pulling.
Wow.
And if she came out with her head, I mean, with her hand on the back, or I mean, with just her head, and she didn't come squeezing with her head, with her hand too, I don't know if she would have made it.
Wow.
I just don't think so. So when I hear that, I'm like, I knew there's a reason God wanted us to be friends also, because we have, I mean, your story is not 100% similar, but it's the wanting to have children, and God actually giving us children at the time that he did. And I only was able to have one. I couldn't have any more. I tried and tried, it just didn't happen again. And they're just special kids, man. Like, I can see why you're also very protective of the things people say to her, and all, you know, how you raise her. And now it all makes sense.
Yeah, I think I agree. When you're older and you just have known your whole life you want to be a mom, and then you've waited for whatever reason, if you pursued a career, if you waited to meet the right husband, by the time you're actually gifted a child, you savor it. You know, you really soak it up, and you want to do a good job. And honestly, if I would have accidentally gotten pregnant in high school or in my 20s, I'd been a completely different mom.
Me too.
Because at this point, I had no regrets. You know, I had finished school, I had a great career, I traveled the world. You know, Brian and I knew each other well. We'd been together for like 10 years at that point. So there were no, you know, mistakes or, I guess, goals that I hadn't achieved or accomplishments that I would have resented my child for not letting me accomplish. She was like my final icing on the cake, you know?
I love that.
And so, yeah, I mean, the way I approach motherhood's probably different than a younger mom. And I had the luxury of watching a lot of my friends become mothers. So I could take the tidbits I liked in their approach and their style and kind of take my own approach. But of course, you know, you're a perfect parent till you become one.
That's what I was going to say, the misconceptions of motherhood. You know, I love what you said about starting off with your career and graduating, because that, for me too, is that if I got my child before, when I was in my 20s, I don't know. I needed to have finished school, finished my university, graduated, had my career, started my career. I was an accountant. I'm like, oh, I don't even understand. And while when I had my miscarriage, the job I was working working was very, very stressful, especially month ends. And any accountant out there knows month end and audits. When you have an audit and month end, they're just so crazy. And so I was wondering, did I have a miscarriage because I was so stressed out at work, not knowing that a miscarriage is just that embryo was not viable.
Right.
It isn't your fault.
Right.
It's not the job. I mean, sometimes, yeah, it could be not your fault, but something could have happened. But for the most part, it is just not a viable pregnancy.
Right.
And it's not your fault.
Right.
So I think I blamed it on the career. Like I was thinking, I'm too busy. So when I got pregnant with Naya, I remember saying, I'm going to pause on working. And Chris was like, my husband was like, yeah, you should just take time and just see if you can, take care of this child. Because that's the only thing I wanted to be as a mom.
Right.
Honestly. So only thing I said, I have my career, I was doing well musically, I was doing all this stuff that, I loved. But there was one thing always missing, and that was being a mom. And so I'm like, if I can't be a mom, what's all this for,
Yeah, and I think that, your God allows certain traumas in your life so that you can relate to other people in your testimony. And so women who've had miscarriages can obviously relate to other women who have, and just be able to comfort them in a way that other women may not be able to, because we've gone through it. And I would say, like, it's not your fault.
Yeah.
I was told the same thing. It just wasn't a viable pregnancy. Your body's so smart. It knows that the baby wouldn't have had a thriving life or lived at all. And so, when I had a miscarriage, I remember they said, your body's like a self-cleaning oven. It knows how to take care of it. And if you need help, we'll help you. But it's just so smart. And that's how God created it. You know, it's like He knew we would sadly go through these things, and our body would take care of it. And the more people you talk to, the more common it is. I mean, I have like cousins that have 5 kids, and it's like almost like every other pregnancy they had miscarriages. They'd have a baby miscarriage, and it was like, oh yeah, I had 3, but I have 5 kids, or I had a couple and then I finally got pregnant, and sadly there's women who've had miscarriages that never did get pregnant. And so I'm just so thankful that you and I both were gifted.
That's a gift.
Our girls.
I know. I like what you said about, like, a lot of women go through this. When you have your miscarriage is when you realize how many people have had miscarriages. Because somehow when people found out, they'll talk to you and they're like, Carol, I did too. And I'm like, what? It's just like, I
no
didn't
one
know.
talks about it.
No
It's
one
like
talks
Fight
about
Club.
it.
It's like Fight Club.
And I'm like, talk about it.
Yeah.
So that when somebody has a miscarriage, they don't think like, I'm weird or whatever. But I love the doctors who keep reminding you that it's not your fault.
Yeah.
And I remember what my doctor said is like, at least you can get pregnant.
Yeah.
At least you can keep a child. I mean, you can get pregnant. She's so good. At least you can get pregnant.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, how is that comforting?
Right.
And she was like, don't worry, you can get pregnant again. That's what she told me.
That's good.
And so for you too, is like the fact that you got pregnant, you could have gotten pregnant again.
Right. That wasn't the hard part. It's keeping it.
Yes.
And a viable
pregnancy.
yeah.
And look at Marilyn. So, this is so cool. I'm so glad that we kind of have that experience together. I didn't know.
I know.
I didn't know.